Hello and welcome to the next watercolor lesson. You can see that today's lesson is going to have trees in it again, and it will also have not a road exactly, but a pathway. This photo is taken at a local arboretum here in Central Florida. It's a free arboretum. You can go in and walk around, enjoy. There are some flowers. There's a lot more paths and trees there that are interesting. You get the shadow patterns on the ground. You get big luscious trees growing. And I don't know if you can see, there's a person on the pathway, and that can always provide a nice point of interest if there is a little person in the picture, maybe a boat, a car, something, an animal. Our eyes tend to be drawn towards those. So I was actually thinking of using the person in this case as a focal point. There's also some great lighting happening. Look to see which direction the shadows are going. Where's the light? Where's the shadow? If you look at the big tree right here, notice that the trunk is mostly in shadow. There's some light falling on one of the limbs here, light and shadow, but a lot of the trunk is in shadow. And then when you look at the shadow of the tree on the ground, you'll notice that it's coming towards the viewer. That means the light is coming from the other side, so then the shadows come more towards us. In the last one, the light was coming more from the side, and so you had the shadows going across the road. And this one, the shadows come more towards us, but add a little bit of an angle, and then it's covering some of the path there. Okay, and then there's more light right there in the background. You have that punch of light. You have some shadow on the left and right, kind of framing it in. And that's one of the ways that you can create a composition, is if there's a lot of contrast between light and dark areas that go, like the dark areas go around the light area, it frames it in and it makes our eye go in and go towards that area. So the light area is back here. I'm just going to do a little quick sketch before we get started to show. So if I have the light area here and then this area is darker, or a lot of it is darker, then it's like, oh, okay, I know this is watercolor. We're not really going to have all of that as super dark. Okay, I'm actually going to leave quite a bit of that light as well, but it gives us a little bit of an idea of where we're going. And then it's like, oh wait, there's a path that's going up in here. Okay, and the path curves around. There's a little person right here. I'm kind of debating whether I should put the little person over here though, because it's nicer if you have a path that's going this way and then the person is over here, then it naturally directs our eyes more towards the person, right? Because our eyes tend to follow the lines in the picture, and so if it's going around this way, it's like, oh, look at, here's the person. So I was thinking of moving the person over. Okay, another thing that I'm thinking about doing in here is, see how this tree trunk ends right about here, and it's only up here in the top half of the picture. I don't like that part in the composition as well either. I think it makes it look a little top heavy, right? There's a big chunk right here. Not great. So what I'm going to do is move the bottom of the tree trunk down. Oh, it's cheating. Okay. gonna move the bottom of the tree trunk down, but leave limbs up here at the top. Okay. And I know that this part, it kind of looks like the trunk, the branch is going more towards the corner. Compositionally, we don't like that either. If anything goes right to the corner, it makes it look a little bit like, oh, there's an arrow and it's pointing our eyes like, leave, 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 get out of here. So I'm going to move that limb off of the corner a bit as well. Okay. And that's something about painting and drawing, is you can move things around a little bit. So this is just a preliminary sketch. I have the watercolor paper off to the side, and I'll also do this sketch there. But I'm explaining what I'm doing here before I do that. Okay, I'm going to let that part of the path come down a little bit because I've got these bushes back here. Okay, there's my person, and then there's a dark bush over here. There's a piece of tree over here that's dark, and then there's like the other side of the road. There's some shadow areas underneath here, and the back of the person is also dark, and you've got these shadows. Let me outline what I'm doing here in marker. That way you can clearly see, because I've kind of talked it into place, but it's like, where is all this going? This here, I'm not going to outline it, because that's what I'm going to do with my marker here is show where are the dark and light areas. And this doesn't have a real strong transition from light to dark for the path. It's more about the shadow coming across. So let's start with an obvious dark. It's like, oh, this area. As these will create sort of the lines that our eyes follow in the picture. This bush. You might even notice that the dark is actually connected here. There's some shadow in that area. Tree trunk. Okay, and I was going to do the person, and there's that rim lighting around the person, meaning it looks like a little edge of light going around. That's really tricky to try to leave that piece of light there, but you know, we're gonna give it a go. As it really helps it pop out, helps him, I should say, pop out in the picture. Okay, and then we've got some dark bushes over here. Over here. Why not connect the dark, right? Okay, so see how a lot of that really dark area is towards the top, but then I don't want it to end up top heavy. Plus, it helps if I don't have this and this right on the same level. See how it gives it more of a feeling of like I'm traveling back in space, because it's like bigger, smaller, smaller. Okay, and then some of these areas will have the shadows, but they won't be quite as dark as the really deep shadow areas. And I'm gonna kind of float it in. Make it go in there, but like loosely. It's like, okay, here's the shadow. It's falling across the roadway, and I'm even going to connect that, all of these shadow areas here falling across the road. Okay, then we end up with that light area, a little bit of shadow back there. Some of the shadow on this side. Okay, now I know we cannot really see a lot of the leaves up in this tree, but since I'm pulling it down, I assume that there will be some slightly darker areas up here, and also that helps to keep our eyes more bound in to the picture, you could say. And then there's some medium kind of stuff going on over here. Okay, so that makes it sound kind of complicated, but we're getting an idea of how you have this lighter area surrounded by medium or more dark-ish areas, and that encircles the person so that our eye goes there. And yes, there's a path here. That's also going to help draw our eye into the picture. You have a little bit of the difference between the color of the path and the color of the grass. It just doesn't have a real strong line in this area here. But okay, so we are ready. We're going to go ahead and draw this on the paper. And you can look at the photo reference as you are working on yours to see if it's where you want all of the different parts to be. And then depending on the shape of your paper, right, some things might get more squished down or more squished this way. So like, just say I had a square piece of paper, then I'd have to readjust my composition a little bit. Actually, I think this could work really well in a square composition. Okay, this time pencil, eraser if I need it, no marker because that would definitely show up in the end product, and I don't want all of the lines to show up there. Okay, so I'm using this as a reference guide for myself to think, okay, where are all of my lines going, and not strictly following exactly what's in the photo. Okay, so I will start by putting in a tree, thinking about how big is the tree, how far down does it go in my picture. I'm leaving a little bit of space down here for where there's the light and shadow pattern area underneath it. Putting this branch out, but not to the corner. I think this is actually a couple of branches together here. If it looks too thick, you can make it thinner. Okay, and I think it looks nicer if I reach the branch across a little bit more, like cover over that area a little bit. But you don't have to do that. It doesn't necessarily make it, it's like it's not necessary, but a little artistic choice with that too. And if I don't like this to be all together like that, I could separate this out and push that limb over too, if my limbs look too clumped together. Okay, the tree on the other side. It's the bottom of that tree is a lot higher. I'm putting it about above the middle, a little bit above the middle. Not 3/4 up. Here I'm leaving it not quite to 2/3 of the way up, just, I want to say 3/5. Okay, go ahead and measure it. I'm kidding. You don't, but when I'm eyeballing it, I'm like, oh, that looks like 3/5. Okay. Okay, so anyway, there's a trunk for that one. In the photo, I'm it's like I'm seeing the trunk because I'm seeing that the dark mass kind of comes together there, but really I'm just seeing leaves, right? I'm seeing the darkness of like leaves in there, but I see a couple of branches in there. So I'm thinking, I know that, that would be the trunk. And then thinking about how far over that area, the tree in that area is going to come, and this dark bush that will connect here, the person, the area for the person. I'm not going to draw all of the I'm not going to draw all of the shadows in there. That we just do with brushwork, because otherwise it's way too hard to follow. Right? It's like, oh no, scribble, scribble. Wait, I'm not in the right spot. Okay, so don't worry about that. We're not going to draw that in. But this gives us a couple of areas like, okay, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go here. And then I've got some bushes on the other side. Because of the way I'm doing this tree, it looks like, I could push some of the bushes that are on this side over this way. I'm just going to do that because in this case I think it will make sense. Okay, and then there is the path. I'll give it a slight angle. That's my person. Those are the bushes back there. It's actually going to come down a little bit because it touches the path. Okay, my path is curving around and it comes down. So I could make it go down at a straight angle. I think in this case, maybe it'll be more interesting if I go at a little bit of an angle like this. Or it could be at an angle like this. Which way should it go? I'm gonna stick with this way, but maybe not quite as severe of an angle. Let it come towards us, and then the other side of the path, person's on the path here, but the other side of the path next to the bush. I have drawn this in very lightly. Hopefully you can see that, but I can take a photo of it as well. And I don't want these lines to show up in my final image. I can take my eraser and just make sure it's very light. Like I can see it, but you know, what if I just take off a little bit here and there so that it's just enough for me to see as a guide, but not so much that it will show up a lot in the end product, particularly this here, because I don't really want a hard edge around that tree, it's more like, oh, it's pieces and leaves. So no hard edge on my bushes. Okay, and we are ready to begin. We're going to cover it with our layers of lighter areas and then move towards some of the darker areas. There's no sky in this picture. Oh, no blue sky. But there's the color contrast that we have are the brown and green. Some of the green is a little bit more blue-green, like over here in the shadow area, and then that contrasts with the lighter areas of the grass are more of a yellow-green. And I think I was mentioning before how the shadows outside, they will tend to be more blue. And then as we go back in space, I'm also going to try to blue it out a little bit in the distance, even though we don't really see that in the picture. But I think it will create more of the effect of going back into space if we just do a little hint of slightly more blue in the background. Okay, large brush. And I'll do that thing about wetting the paper too this time. Okay, so let's see. Let me start with the path. I will wet the path. So it's going around and down. And I'm looking at just the light areas of the path. I think I will start with the yellow ochre for that, and plenty of water. There seems to be some green in my brush. I keep making a streak and then having to brush it off. It's okay though, actually. Even if this doesn't come out totally solid, it won't matter because you've got all those pieces of dappled light across there. You wouldn't even notice if there was a whole bunch of streaks in there. In this case. Okay. And now starting with some nice bright green areas. We can do that this side, and we can maybe change it a little bit in the back and just make it slightly bluer in that back area. So I'm going to mix up a very bright green. I'll start with a good amount of yellow and a touch of my lighter blue. It's amazing how much more yellow you need than blue for a green that looks really bright like this. Okay, I need my water in there. Okay, and then once again, I'm going to do using just water on my brush. And here, if it blends together, if the road and the grass blends together, so much the better, because it will make it look like, oh, it's not so even. It's like clumps of grass. But having the shadow go across it will also kind of get rid of the that line right there. I think some of the color may collect at the edge there. Okay, and then in the background here, I'm going to just put slightly more blue into my green. So that green that I already mixed up, I'm going to take a touch more blue. That might be too much of a touch. Okay. So it just changes it a little bit. Yeah, I just changed it too much. But just for example there. Okay, it's, yeah, yeah. Okay, so it is different. It's slightly more blue because the other one had a lot of yellow in it. Okay. Okay, now I'm going in between the parts of the tree trunk here, but I don't really have to if I don't want to because a lot of that is so dark. The only part it will matter is if I have that light area on the limb and I want to preserve that as more of a brown color, then I don't want to have a light green over that area. Okay, now one thing I do want to make sure is that I'm preserving the piece of white area right around the person, that light, that highlight rim lighting right around the person. So I don't want to get my water or my color there. But anywhere else, it's not going to make as much of a difference. I can just brush it in. Okay, and if it blends together, it's kind of like, well, so much the better, because then it doesn't have as much of a hard line there. You may even need to switch to a different brush when you're going around the person so that it doesn't it's like no touchy, no touchy. Okay, I'm going to use a slightly different brush right there, and think about how close I'm going to get without touching so that I'm leaving the whole space of the person. And thinking about the shape of the outside. Okay, it's a simple shape. It's not very complicated. It's just the head is a little smaller. So I can go in on the sides there. Okay. Now, if your paper is nice and soaking wet and you want to do some shadows across the ground, this may be a good time to do it. But we'll mix up some color. I'm going to go for some brown. And then if it's too challenging, like, oh my goodness, that's gonna make me sweat, just wait until it's dry, and then the color won't bleed together. This is already actually fairly dry, so I'm not sure that the color will actually bleed. It may not. Okay, so I'm doing clumpy pieces, and this actually looks very red. I think I'm gonna have to go in there. Gonna have to add some blue to that color. It's too red. Too red. Okay. Better. Because of course, as I was saying, the shadow is more blue than the light area, so it doesn't really make any sense if I get the shadow to be super red, huh? It's like, what? I thought you said... Oh, yeah, that's right. This might remind you of drawing the ripples. Oh, sorry, that's in the green. I was going to do more of a greenish color there. Okay, and I still have some of that red there. It might be kind of interesting though, so I'm just gonna leave it, but kind of let it blend in. See about leaving some holes and pieces here. And then the ones that are going farther back on the road are thinner, because you'll see that perspective, right, where the shadow parts in the back, it looks more squashed, and here it looks thicker, just like with the ripples on the water. And it's like, oh, it applies here too. It's the same type of idea. It's a different thing, different object, but the same type of idea is still applying. Okay, so I'm going to do more of a blue shadow. That's very blue. I almost feel like it's too bright. If I put a touch of red in there to kind of make it a little bit more brown and not quite as... Okay, that's a blue looking shadow. It still doesn't look quite green enough to me. Blue-green type shadow. Okay, let's try it. Yep. That will do it. Okay, and I'm actually looking at the shadows I see, but I also know that my tree trunk isn't in the same area anymore, so I can't go exactly by what I see, but I do want to connect it with the shadows that are on the road, right? Like, I don't want to leave it like, oh, that edge doesn't touch the rest of the shadow. Oops, right? Don't want that. Okay, so these are thicker, and then the ones that come towards the back or are going back are thinner. And I understand that I am rearranging how the shadow is falling in this case, because it's like, wait a minute, if I pull the tree trunk down, doesn't the whole shadow come down with it? Yes, it would. But I'm taking a little artistic license here in that case as well. Okay, and the other side of the road. Connecting. There's more shadow over here. More shadow. Making that connect together. Ooh, okay. It's kind of interesting, huh? Doesn't look exactly like the picture, but there's an interesting thing happening with the brown and the green, brown and green. I think we will need to add a little bit more color, particularly onto the grass here. Okay, and then as I'm going back in space with these shadows, guess what? I'm going to add even more blue. Let me use some of the dark blue in the shadow. It's not quite coming up. Come on. Dark blue. This paint isn't wetting as quickly, so that's why I'm having to brush over it a lot more. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so that's a really more of a blue green, as opposed to a green blue, right? It's very blue looking type of green. And I'm comparing, I go, you know what, that might be a little bit extra blue. Maybe that's a little too much. I just want to change a little bit as I'm going back. And I'm going to water it a bit more. That way I can still layer things. So this is maybe not quite as dark as it will all be in the end. Okay, and then this here, this is the shadow on the bush, so it's a slightly different green, slightly more blue. Connecting it over on the grass. It's like, okay, well, the grass is going back. Those shadow areas can get more blue to create that feeling of going back in space. Okay. All of this tree here. We could call this the middle ground. The middle ground, right? Foreground, middle ground, background. And then if we make the background greens even more bluish, that will help it to pop back in space even more. So I'm using little brush strokes. It's mostly stuck together, right? Because there's not a lot of light showing through that area. But just mostly connected. I'll probably put a little piece of brown in there later for the trunk. And on this side, our mid-ground bushes. The bottom of the bush is more flat. The top is more rounded. I don't know if they're sculpting it that way because it's the Arboretum. Maybe they're rounding their bushes, or maybe that type of bush is just naturally more rounded. I'm not quite sure. Okay, and then this, my imagined bush, or the one that the middle bush that's on this side that I pushed over this way. Put it in, and if you leave it kind of piecey and not solid on the top, but a little bit more bits and pieces, it will look more like a bush. Ooh, okay, that's going to spread some, but I like it, gives it a little, I don't know, personality. But you don't have to have that. But if you have that in different areas here, don't worry, because I think for this painting particularly, it can add something nice. Okay. Okay. So foreground, middle ground. All right, I'm going to go back. Oh, before I do, you know what? I was going to put just a few leaves up in here, they're not really there. If that's too like, what are you doing? Then don't do that. But I just thought maybe that will help to add a little something slightly darker up in this area to give more of a bounding effect, like making your eye go in. Okay, on to the background. I'm going to soften that edge a bit because I kind of don't want it to be, since I don't exactly know where I'm going with that, I don't want it to be super sharp and distracting. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then as I suspected, you get some interesting things here. Since I put down one color that was wet, and then I immediately put another color that was wet over it, you get an interesting separation in certain areas. I like those kinds of effects. They might be like, oh no, it's not the right color, right? But I like how those kinds of effects can happen. And you might be able to try that out too, just even on a piece of scrap paper to see if you like how it's doing that. It's even doing that on my palette because look it, I didn't totally mix it. I was like, whoops, I need more blue. So I hurry up and put some blue in there, but you can still see that there's like a clump of brown and I was like, hurry, hurry. Okay. All right. And then I was trying to get it where maybe it would bleed a little bit more. I got a little bit of it to do that, but it was fairly dry already when I was putting that in. Okay, so up here, I'm gonna touch it with a little more blue. Oh, okay, so this is really gonna be a blue-ish green, but not too dark because we're going way back there, and you notice that way back is not where the darkest areas are. So even though the color itself, right, blue, the dark blue is very dark, but I don't want that to be very, very shadowy. I just want it to be more blue. Okay, so here we go. Background area behind the path. I've moved my person over, so I'm remembering. I was like, oh, okay, I can go there. I can do that. But I want to stop when I get to the person, go around him on the other side there. Okay, here's some shadow area. There's I don't know if this is part of this tree. I think it's actually, yeah, it's a tree in the background, so that's good. Looking at the direction that the leaves are going, it's kind of coming out this way and down this way. So if some of my brush strokes go in that direction, it can be helpful. Looking for the direction. And I know over here, this green is not quite as far back, but I'm gonna use the same one. I think it will be fine. And just remembering that as I'm putting it in, don't go over the person. All right. It's like just go around. Carefully around. Okay, and you might notice I'm leaving some pieces of lighter areas where I'm going to have the light area of the tree, right where the tree is getting hit by the light. Okay. And I don't totally see this, but I am leaving a lighter edge and just imagining like, oh, okay, if this person has rim lighting, then if this tree has some rim lighting, it will make sense as far as the light, how the light is working in there. Okay. Details. Okay. Yeah, I wanted a few areas here. I forgot to put in a few areas, but I didn't want them too blue. So I'll just add a little bit of yellow in the mix, but not have it too dark. Just touching a couple areas here as it's going back. Extend a bit onto the other side. If I go behind the tree trunk, then it looks more like, oh, it's a shadow that continues behind the tree trunk. Good. Starting to shape up. Now, I see that there's just a bit of the lighter area on this tree limb, and on this one I know why these ones don't have it. It's because they're angled like this, and so then when the light is hitting it, then it's not hitting that area. I can leave a little bit on those ones as well if I want to, because it will still like work, or I can say no. You'll also see it a little bit on the edge of this tree trunk, which has started to get a little skinny, but I think I can fatten it up because I can just cover over part of that. Okay, but first, the light area. I'll use some yellow ochre, just a bit. Yellow ochre. Wherever I want it. I'm going to cover up part of that yellow ochre, so see, I don't have to worry about if that's too wide until I get to the next step. Okay. This side of my trunk. All right, and then I'm going to go in for the dark. Let's do it. Now this brown that I have is very much of a red brown. It will need some more blue in it, and I think I'll probably need to add another layer over the top that has more of a black brown. So let's start with that though, a blue brown, because this one is kind of red. I will add some blue to it. It'll give it a shadier feeling since it's on that side of the tree. I don't need a lot of water in there. Okay. That's very blue. Okay. That's a little too blue. Let's try that again. I just put a little more of the brown in to it. That's better. That's better. And it will lighten as it's drying, and then we'll see it a little bit more. Okay. And then I was going to extend the trunk over a bit because I thought, oh, it's getting a little thin. But don't worry, since this is a dark area, you just, thicken it to the amount you want. Also, if the trunk looks a little rough, and not just stick straight, it looks more believable as a tree trunk. So if I have a couple areas where it's like, oh, it's not perfectly even, but you don't want it to go like super thick, super thin, super thick, super thin, because then it's like, no, no, that's not a tree, right? It stays about the same width. It's just that, with the bark and with knots and things, it can kind of wiggle a bit. And if it's a little thicker towards the bottom, that also makes a lot of sense for trees, for tree trunks. Okay, curving. Add that limb in. Limbs will get thinner. They will taper as they go out. So you don't want this part of the limb wider than this part. If it looks about the same, it works. But if the outside part is thicker than the part that's right next to the trunk, no good. All right, so I want to make sure that my tree limb is not getting thicker, but it's getting slightly thinner as it moves out. So I only did just a tiny amount, but if it's about the same, that's good too. I'm thinking about kind of splitting that a little bit and letting there be just a little bit of light, like I think it might be some leaves. I can't quite tell, but I'm pretty sure there's two pieces of branch in that area. So I feel like if I split it a little bit, then it looks more realistic. Oops, see, I'm making that side of the branch thicker. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to fix that though. I will just thicken the other side of my branch and then it won't look weird. Yeah. Okay, it's still weird though. Look at that. See how this is thicker and then it's like, whoops, it got thinner. No good. No good. So, I'm going to thicken my tree trunk a bit more because I can't have it too fat on the top and then it's like, oh, what happened? Why did your tree get so skinny on the bottom? Okay, and as I'm going here, you might be noticing that since I'm widening it, I'm kind of adding another layer in there too of color, but it's still kind of wet, so it's blending together. Okay. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so that looks more like the tree can actually stand up now. It's not too skinny. This part right here on the edge, that's actually part of the tree as well. And that was going to be a little bit of light hitting it, but I'm going to darken it too, so then it will get just a touch wider. But I don't want to do that until I've given it a little more of a chance to dry. However, I can go over here and use some of my mix and add a trunk and some branches here. This, I'm just imagining these right now. The key to imagined branches is the trunk stays mostly vertical and the branches are not even. So it's not all the same, right? They go out and up, but kind of at an angle and not the same on both sides. And then it's like, oh yeah, that looks about right. Okay, but I will put another layer on here and then it won't be as visible. And this is not, it will lighten up as it's drying too. Okay. Assess. Let's see how we're doing. So far, this is very light. It may need to get a touch darker. The person is the only thing that doesn't have anything on him yet. He needs some shadow. I'm going to use this brush, but if you find that this brush is too thick for the details, switch to your tiny brush. In fact, it might be good if I just switch to my tiny brush when I'm doing that, so that you don't feel like, oh, why is it so hard, right? It's like, just touch, tiny. Okay, for that I am going to use a gray. So I'll take my black, and do a layer here, head. I think I'm going to need to do another layer, but I want to make sure I'm leaving the rim of light. So this is just the inside. It looks like a bowling pin, kind of. You can have some legs too. Oh yeah. A bowling pin with legs. Plus legs. Fun. Okay. Yep, that is dry enough for me to add a bit more of the yellow ochre. Switching back to my number 6 brush. Okay, so this, we want to be able to see the side of the tree trunk here. Kind of run into my shadows a bit. I'm trying to go over it a little bit so that it will not show just the grass shadows, but it will kind of like blend those out. Okay, and I can rough up the edge here so that it's not a super hard edge. Same thing here and here. See how it's like you can't even see that. Actually, yeah, well, I'm only going to darken that part a little bit because see the trees behind it will darken some too. So just needed a little bit more here. And I was going to do it right here too. And if I go in and kind of rub the brush over some of that dark area, that will help it to smush and not have a really sharp line, because the tree trunk is rough. So if I have a sharp line there, then it may not look quite right. It's like, why does your tree turn at a sharp angle where the light is? Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I don't want to pick up a lot of the color, right? I don't want to dab it and pick up a lot of the color. But if I just have a not too wet brush, and I'm not really adding color, I'm just kind of roughing it up. And if it's totally dry, that won't work, right? But if it's somewhat wet, then it will kind of smush it a bit. Smush it, smush it, smush it. Yeah, better. Okay, let's see about another layer going on in some places. I'm thinking that I will start with the middle ground, the greens, because here I've got it fairly dark. I don't know if I'm going to need to darken this anymore right now, because technically it's already got both of the layers on the trunk, possibly even a third layer, because I was working on widening it, right? But the other dark areas here in the middle ground, they're going to need it to be somewhat darker. And I know how it looks flat in the picture. The dark areas look flat. But see, if I have this and then I put some more dark areas but not cover all of those dark areas, then it gives it more of a feeling of three-dimensionality. So I'm going to go in there with my green. This is I had mixed it to this green, but then I kind of remixed it out to this green, so it's already what this is. So this is a green, kind of a mid green, that's not, it's a slightly more towards blue, but not as blue as this one. Challenge, right? And you'll see I'm going right over the tree limbs that I made, so it will cover over part of that. And I want the dark area to extend to the edge of the paper and not be just like, oh, here's a round thing, but it doesn't touch the edge, because that will help the flow of the composition. It may look a little funny if it doesn't touch the edge. Okay, same for the other areas here. We're going to darken in some of this. Okay, other side also has the mid-ground areas. Okay, and I know I haven't put that little piece going across there yet. A little piece of shadow that's extending across. I kind of like it there, so I am going to add it in. And that was more like this color, which I have here, but I think I didn't. I think I put more blue in here, so I'll put a little bit of brown back into it. So this was the brown and the blue. And very thin. If this is too thick, use this. In fact, I will do that because that will be helpful in keeping it thin, but not like a hard line across, kind of patchy going across. Oh, we're going to hit grass. Yes, I'm going to do this. Connect, connect. Grass. Oh, okay. It's starting to feel like it's going back in space. Our person can have another layer of gray or a grayish brown, kind of like this color. The head. I'm just doing this lightly because I don't want it to darken up too much. Leaving some space where the neck is and not darkening that as much because it's like it's there, but it's not as dark. Does it feel like a tiny person? I like it. It has that feel to it, like, oh, look at the person. Okay, back to the background trees. I'm going to look for a few more areas in there, but that part needs to be a bit more blue, but not a dark layer, so plenty of water. So this is like a blue-green. Oops, got little spots there. That's all right, because kind of adds a little something to me. Okay, so right into the shadows, the darker areas of the shadows. So down at the bottom here, where it would be under the trees, it'll get a little darker in the shadows, but then in the trees itself, if I'm thinking the light is coming from this way, it's right, lighter, darker, darker. Whatever is the left side of the pieces of shadow I made, I can darken the left side because it's behind, but the sun is behind, but more towards the right. And then it will turn the form a little bit more. Okay, this tree is hanging over, or it looks that way to me, kind of hanging over. Yep. Okay, this is going to need to get darker over here to balance this out, because look how hard and dark this is. Oh. If this is just about as dark as here, then it balances it for our eyes. So I'm going to need another darker layer there. Might need more blue in that really dark area. Let's see. Yeah, that helps. Okay. And that bush connecting to it. Right? Better. Yeah, it's not as heavy over just on this side when I darken this area. And I'll do a little here too. Okay, and then I'm also going to do some more dark on these shadows. Just a bit more. Okay, I've got my blue-green, but it doesn't have to be as blue. This can be more of a greenish. I want it to feel like there's shadow, particularly around the trunk of the tree to help anchor it down to the ground. Because if I don't have enough there, it might look like, oh, the tree is floating. It's weird. And on the road, where I had the brown and blue together. Trying not to darken it too much. So I didn't have quite enough water in there. And you can kind of overlap a little bit when you're doing this, because then it looks like it's connected instead of, oh, there's a hard edge between the one side and the other side of the, like where the path is and where the grass is. Okay, now I do also notice that I don't really have quite enough color in some of this grass area and also in some of the other light areas, right? We've been working on the dark areas, but it's like, oh, there's not quite enough color in some of the light areas. Well, we're going to add a bit more of that as well. Okay, so the grassy area up here was more of a yellow-green. I've already got some blue kind of stuck to my yellow, but I don't want it to be like that yellow. So I'll put a little bit of blue in there. Let's see here. What do you think? Too blue! Yeah, it seems like when doing that really light color of the grass, it often gets too blue. See, that's a little too yellow, but I think that's okay though. If it's a little too yellow, it kind of still works. So. Ah, okay. It's like I needed a little more color. I was too pale. And if you kind of go over the line a bit, it works. because then it's like the grass is growing partly over the path. And if you're wondering what that is, there is a little bit of light on that side, but some of that's also kind of imaginary. Okay, and I'm going to take this, add a touch of blue to, oh, that's a lot of a touch, huh? Okay, some blue, but I'm going to actually make it more watery because I'm going to go back here and in some of the light areas, yeah, that's way too blue. More yellow. Okay, yeah, still keeping it fairly yellow, but also very watery, because in the background I don't want a dark layer. I just want a little bit of detail in some lighter areas, but not covering the person. I have to be careful. Don't cover the person. Okay, so if I do kind of something in between where I've got the shadow here and this, then it can help to turn the bush a little bit more, make it look more three-dimensional. And I leave just a little bit of that really light area also on this side, this bush. Give it more greenness. That can work for this tree. May enhance some of the tree in the back there. Yeah, something. Over the top of this shadow. Around this detail. Better. Okay. I think that just a little bit more of something is needed. Couple more things are needed. Number one, I need a little more color on my road. Number two, I need a little bit more shadow back here. Not too dark, but a little bit more, right? Because right now, it kind of still doesn't feel like it's sitting in the scene together. And number three, just another touch of shadow on the person in some areas, not everywhere. Okay, so for the road, I had used the yellow ochre before. I'm going to use some yellow ochre and some brown combined together. That's nice and warm. I wonder if it should be a slightly more reddish, or if I should let it be that way. You know what? I think I'm going to go for that. Let's see how it looks. I like that look. Okay, if you wanted to match more exactly with the color of the road, a touch more red, possibly a touch more blue. Okay, and then you'll notice that as it's getting into this light area, it's really bright. So I'm not going to darken that very much. I'll just do a little something at the edges of some shadows. And a little overlapping there. We're almost there. Okay, number 2, a touch more of that shadow area that's in the background, so it's a little more bluish. Going around my tree limbs here. Down into the bottom. See, that side got dark enough, but this side, the underneath of the road where the shadows would be, didn't quite get dark enough. And I feel like that needs to connect here. Like when I say connect, I mean like connect behind the person, right? So it looks like it's a one piece of shadow going behind the person, just like this shadow is going behind the tree. Something. Fiddling. That's fiddling. Okay, and then lastly, I think it will help if I have just a tiny bit more shadow on the middle of the person's head and more towards the left side of the shadow of the person to make him look just a bit more 3D. And there we are. There we are. A lovely sunny day. Person walking down the path in the Arboretum. I do notice if I was gonna tweak anything, I would probably do something with these limbs. See how they just kind of like look like hard sticks? That if you put a little more leaf over them, then it won't look quite as hard. Right? If I just do a little something to soften up the silhouette, because that's not really our focus in this picture. This is. So if that area is too hard looking, like the edges are too hard on it, then it draws our attention away from the focal area. Okay, I will really leave it like that. All right, that is it, and I hope that you enjoyed this one.